My name is Shelby, and at 28 years old, I thought I had found my dream job at Pinnacle Advertising. For the first few months, everything seemed perfect. The company had an amazing reputation, and my boss, Marcus, initially came across as professional and supportive. But things changed so dramatically that I still get chills thinking about that performance review day. What Marcus never realized, as he literally danced with joy at my tears, was that his victory celebration would become his professional funeral. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on the worst boss in America, drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you've ever dealt with a toxic manager. Trust me, you'll want to see how this ends. The path that led me to Pinnacle Advertising started at Syracuse University, where I earned my degree in marketing with a minor in digital media. College had been challenging but rewarding, and I graduated with honors ready to take on the advertising world. My first job was at a small agency in Rochester, where I spent 2 years learning the basics and building my portfolio. While I gained valuable experience there, I always had my sights set on something bigger. Pinnacle was that something bigger. With offices in 5 major cities and clients ranging from Fortune 500 companies to exciting startups, they represented everything I aspired to in my career. Their campaigns had won numerous industry awards, and their creative approach was frequently featured in marketing publications. Landing a job there felt like reaching for the stars, but I was determined to try. When the marketing specialist position opened up, I spent an entire weekend perfecting my application and portfolio. I must have revised my cover letter 20 times before finally submitting it. The waiting period was excruciating, and when I received the email inviting me for an interview, I literally screamed with excitement, startling my roommate Alexandra, who thought something terrible had happened. The Pinnacle offices were exactly what I had imagined, modern, bustling with energy walls adorned with framed awards and prints of their most successful campaigns. During my first interview with the HR team, I tried not to appear too starstruck, but inside I was practically vibrating with excitement. When they called me back for a second interview this time with the department head, I felt like I was one step closer to my dream. That was when I met Marcus Donovan for the first time. At 52, he had an impressive presence, tall, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit with salt and pepper hair that added to his distinguished appearance. His office showcased photos of him with celebrities and business leaders, evidence of his connections in the industry. His handshake was firm, his smile confident, and the way other employees deferred to him as we walked through the office spoke volumes about his authority. "So, Shelby," he said as we sat down for the interview, "tell me why I should choose you over the dozens of other applicants who want this position." His directness caught me off guard, but I appreciated the straightforward approach. I outlined my experience, highlighting campaigns I had worked on and results I had achieved. Marcus listened attentively, asking pointed questions that demonstrated his industry knowledge. By the end of the interview, I felt challenged but exhilarated. "You have potential," he said as we concluded. "That much is clear, but potential needs to be shaped, directed. Are you someone who can take criticism and use it to grow?" "Absolutely," I assured him. "I believe feedback is essential for improvement." He smiled at that. Good answer. The right answer. A week later, I received the job offer. The starting salary was better than I had expected, and the benefits package was excellent. I accepted immediately, gave notice at my old job, and prepared to start this exciting new chapter. My first few weeks at Pinnacle were a whirlwind of training sessions, introductions, and learning the company systems. Everyone seemed friendly, if somewhat intense, and I quickly bonded with Jasmine Parker, another marketing specialist who had been with the company for 2 years. Jasmine showed me the ropes, introduced me to key people, and gave me insider tips on how things really worked at Pinnacle. "Marcus runs a tight ship," she warned me during lunch one day. "He expects excellence and has little patience for mistakes, but he can also be your biggest advocate if you impress him." I also met Philip Anderson, a marketing manager, who seemed to be Marcus's golden boy. Philip had been with the company for 5 years and was frequently praised during meetings. Rachel Thompson, the HR director, was another key figure, professional, approachable, but somewhat guarded in a way I couldn't quite define. For the first 2 months, everything was going well. I threw myself into my projects, stayed late when necessary, and made sure my work was thoroughly checked before submission. Marcus seemed pleased with my performance, occasionally stopping by my desk with quick words of approval. I was living my professional dream, excited to get to work each morning. It was around the 3-month mark that I noticed the first red flag. During a client presentation, I had contributed a key insight that helped win over a hesitant customer. The client specifically mentioned how my approach had addressed their concerns. But when Marcus summarized the meeting in an email to upper management, he presented my idea as his own with no mention of my contribution. I told myself not to overreact. Perhaps this was just how corporate culture worked at this level. Maybe individual contributions were considered team efforts under his leadership. But over the next few weeks, I noticed a pattern: ideas from male team members were attributed correctly, while suggestions from female employees often became Marcus's strategy or the team approach. Another subtle issue emerged during team meetings. When Jacob or Philip spoke, Marcus would nod, maintain eye contact, and engage with their ideas. When I or other women on the team presented, he would often check his phone, interrupt, or quickly move on to the next topic. It was so subtle that I doubted myself at first, wondering if I was being overly sensitive. "You're not imagining it," Jasmine confirmed when I finally mentioned my observations over coffee. "It's been like this since I started. Some of us have discussed it, but it's hard to address without seeming like you're not a team player." Despite these concerns, I remained determined to succeed. This was still my dream job at my dream company, and I believed that excellent work would eventually speak for itself. I rationalized the early warning signs as challenges to overcome, not reasons to retreat. With each project, I poured in more effort, documented my contributions more carefully, and tried to build stronger relationships with teammates who could vouch for my work. What I didn't realize then was that these subtle issues were just the beginning. Like a frog in slowly heating water, I failed to recognize how dangerous my situation would become. The dream job was about to reveal its nightmare reality. 6 months into my time at Pinnacle, the atmosphere around my work changed dramatically. What had been occasional slights or overlooked contributions evolved into something far more targeted and destructive. Marcus began scrutinizing every aspect of my projects with a level of criticism that wasn't applied to my colleagues. The first major incident occurred during our weekly team meeting. I had prepared a comprehensive presentation on a new campaign strategy for our clothing retail client. After spending hours gathering data and creating compelling visuals, I felt confident in my proposal. But as soon as I began speaking, Marcus interrupted. "This approach is completely wrong for this client," he announced to the room. "Have you even looked at their previous campaigns? This shows a fundamental misunderstanding of their brand." I tried to explain that I had analyzed their previous work and was suggesting a new direction based on changing market trends, but he cut me off again. "We'll move on. Philip, what are your thoughts on this client?" Philip looked uncomfortable, but proceeded to present ideas very similar to mine. To my astonishment, Marcus nodded approvingly. "Now that's innovative thinking. See, Shelby, that's the kind of approach we need." This pattern repeated itself in different forms. Reports I submitted would come back covered in red marks and criticisms, while similar work from others received minimal corrections. Deadlines for my projects would suddenly change without notice, leaving me scrambling to complete work that was then criticized for seeming rushed. "Marcus wants you to revise the entire Johnson proposal," Jacob told me one afternoon, looking apologetic. "He said the approach isn't working and he needs it by tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning. But we finalized that concept last week. He approved it himself. Jacob shrugged. He said priorities have changed. Sorry. I stayed until 11 that night, reworking the entire proposal. When I submitted it the next morning, bleary-eyed from lack of sleep, Marcus merely glanced at it and said, "This still needs work, but I guess it will have to do." I began to notice that Marcus was excluding me from important meetings with clients. "We need to keep the group small," he would explain, despite including more junior team members than me. Opportunities that should have naturally come my way as part of my role were redirected to others, particularly Philip, who seemed increasingly uncomfortable with the situation. After one particularly frustrating day, I decided to address the issue directly. I scheduled a meeting with Marcus, practiced what I wanted to say, and approached the conversation professionally. "Marcus, I've noticed that there seems to be some dissatisfaction with my work lately, and I want to understand how I can improve," I began. He leaned back in his chair. "I'm glad you've recognized there are problems. Self-awareness is the first step. The thing is," I continued carefully, "I'm not always clear on what the specific issues are. The feedback has been somewhat inconsistent, and I find that requirements often change after I've already started a project." His expression hardened. If you're suggesting that the problem is with my management style, rather than your performance, that's exactly the kind of deflection that concerns me. No, that's not what I meant, I backpedaled. I just want to understand your expectations better so I can meet them. My expectations are excellence, consistency, and a positive attitude. I'm not seeing those from you. Maybe this role isn't the right fit for your capabilities. The threat was veiled but clear. I left his office feeling worse than when I entered. The next day, in a team email, Marcus praised Philip for taking initiative and seeking constructive feedback after Philip had asked him a simple question about a project timeline. The pointed comparison wasn't lost on anyone. "He's gaslighting you," Jasmine said when I showed her the email. "This is what he does. He makes you question yourself, your abilities, your perceptions." But why me? What did I do to deserve this? Jasmine hesitated. "You're good, Shelby. Really good. You have fresh ideas, clients respond well to you, and you work hard. Some managers feel threatened by talented women. They can't fire you for being good at your job, so they try to make you miserable enough to leave." Her words resonated with things I had experienced but had been reluctant to name. The realization that this might be systematic rather than something I was doing wrong was both relieving and terrifying. "Start documenting everything," Jasmine advised. "Every email, every meeting, every change deadline. Keep copies of your work before and after his revisions. Forward important emails to your personal account. If things get worse, you'll need evidence." I took her advice, creating a detailed log of incidents with dates, times, and witnesses. I saved emails, took screenshots, and kept multiple versions of projects to show how requirements would change without explanation. What began as a small file quickly grew into an extensive record of what I now recognized as workplace harassment. As Marcus's treatment worsened, my anxiety levels skyrocketed. I began having trouble sleeping, often lying awake, replaying interactions, and second-guessing decisions. I lost weight as my appetite diminished, and the stress headaches became nearly constant. Friends outside of work noticed the change in me. "You don't seem like yourself lately," my roommate Alexandra commented one evening. "You used to talk about work with such enthusiasm, but now you barely mention it." My social life suffered as I worked increasingly long hours trying to meet impossible standards. I canceled plans with friends to revise projects that Marcus would later dismiss anyway. The job I had once dreamed about had become a nightmare I couldn't escape, especially in the current job market where positions at reputable agencies were scarce. One particularly difficult afternoon after Marcus had criticized my work in front of a client, I found myself hiding in the bathroom trying to pull myself together. The door opened and I quickly wiped my eyes, but not before Rachel from HR saw my state. "Shelby, is everything okay?" Her concern seemed genuine. "Just allergies," I lied. "I'm fine." She looked unconvinced but didn't press the issue. "My door is always open if you need to talk. About anything." I nodded but said nothing. At that point, I still wasn't ready to formalize my concerns. What if I was overreacting? What if complaining made things worse? What if no one believed me? But as the hostile environment intensified, my health and well-being continued to deteriorate. The dream job had become a source of constant stress and anxiety, affecting every aspect of my life. And the worst was yet to come. As my one-year anniversary at Pinnacle approached, the looming annual performance review filled me with dread. The date had been on my calendar for weeks, a digital reminder of the inevitable confrontation with Marcus. Each time I glanced at it, my heart rate accelerated, and my palms grew sweaty. What should have been a straightforward evaluation of my work had transformed into something that felt more like an impending trial. The psychological toll of working under Marcus had become impossible to ignore. I had lost 15 pounds since starting at Pinnacle, my clothes hanging loosely on my frame. Dark circles had become a permanent feature under my eyes, prompting concerned comments from friends and family. The insomnia that had started as occasional restlessness had evolved into full nights of anxious wakefulness, my mind racing with worst-case scenarios and replaying critical comments. "You need to see a doctor," Alexandra insisted after finding me at 3 a.m. sitting at our kitchen table, staring blankly at my laptop. "This isn't normal, Shelby. No job is worth what this is doing to you." I finally relented and made an appointment. The doctor listened to my symptoms, asked about my work situation, and concluded I was experiencing anxiety and the early signs of depression due to chronic workplace stress. Your body is in a constant fight-or-flight state, she explained. That's not sustainable. We can try medication to help with the symptoms, but the root cause needs to be addressed. I left with a prescription and pamphlets about workplace stress, but the underlying problem remained. The performance review was still approaching, and I knew Marcus would use it as an opportunity to formalize his criticisms and potentially create a paper trail that could lead to my termination. Despite my deteriorating mental health, I was determined to be prepared. I spent evenings and weekends compiling evidence of my accomplishments, successful campaigns I had contributed to positive client feedback metrics, showing the effectiveness of my strategies and emails from colleagues praising my work. I created a comprehensive portfolio that objectively demonstrated my value to the company, hoping that facts and data might penetrate whatever bias Marcus held against me. During this preparation period, I had a candid conversation with Jasmine about Marcus's history with female employees. We met at a coffee shop far from the office, where we could speak freely without fear of being overheard by colleagues. You're not the first, Jasmine revealed, stirring her latte absently. Since I've been here, 2 other women have left the marketing department after similar experiences with Marcus. What happened to them? I asked, a chill running through me despite the warmth of the coffee shop. Emily was the first. Brilliant creative director clients loved her. Marcus started the same pattern, criticizing her work, changing requirements, excluding her from meetings. She tried to stick it out, but eventually resigned. Last I heard, she moved to another state to restart her career. And the other? Kimberly. She was more direct than Emily, actually confronted Marcus about his behavior in front of others. After that, he made her life hell. Assigned her impossible projects, criticized her in front of clients. She was gone within 3 months. The pattern was clear and disturbing. Has anyone ever reported him formally? Jasmine shook her head. Not that I know of. People need their jobs, references, industry connections. Marketing can be a small world. What about Rachel in HR? Would she be helpful? Jasmine considered this. Rachel's professional and seems decent, but HR works for the company, not for us. Their primary concern is protecting Pinnacle from liability. Despite this cautionary note, I decided to have a preliminary conversation with Rachel. Without making formal accusations, I wanted to understand the company's processes for addressing workplace concerns. I scheduled a meeting, presenting it as a general inquiry rather than a specific complaint. Rachel welcomed me into her office with a warm smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. What can I help you with, Shelby? I wanted to understand the company's procedures for addressing workplace conflicts. I began carefully. Hypothetically, if an employee were experiencing difficulties with a supervisor's management style, what would be the appropriate steps to take? Rachel's expression remained neutral, but something in her posture changed, a slight stiffening that suggested she understood the subtext. Pinnacle has a formal grievance process. Typically, we encourage employees to first attempt to resolve issues directly with the person involved. If that's not possible or doesn't resolve the situation, the next step would be a formal written complaint. What would need to be included in such a complaint? Specific incidents with dates, times, and details. Any relevant communications like emails or messages. Names of witnesses if applicable. The more documentation, the better we can assess the situation. And what protections exist for employees who file complaints? Against retaliation, for example. Rachel's gaze was steady. Retaliation for filing a good faith complaint is against company policy and potentially illegal. That said, I won't sugarcoat this. These situations can be complicated, especially when they involve department heads. I nodded, understanding the unspoken message. Without rock-solid evidence, it would be my word against Marcus's, and he had seniority, authority, and established relationships throughout the company. As I stood to leave, Rachel added, Shelby, if you're considering filing a complaint, make sure your documentation is thorough. Contemporaneous notes are valuable, but recordings, emails, and witnesses are stronger. Her mention of recordings sparked an idea. Connecticut was a one-party consent state for audio recording, meaning I could legally record conversations I participated in without informing the other parties. The performance review was a perfect opportunity to document Marcus's behavior directly, rather than relying on my recollection afterward. I researched small recording devices, eventually purchasing one that resembled an ordinary pen. I tested it multiple times to ensure it worked properly, and practiced positioning it so it would capture clear audio without being obvious. This felt like an extreme step, but my instincts told me the review would not be a standard professional evaluation. The night before the scheduled review, I laid out my outfit, a conservative navy blue suit that projected confidence and professionalism. I organized my portfolio of accomplishments, rehearsed responses to potential criticisms, and tried to prepare mentally for whatever might occur. Despite my preparation, sleep eluded me once again. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror at 5 a.m, staring at my reflection. The confident, excited young woman who had started at Pinnacle a year ago was barely recognizable in the anxious, exhausted person looking back at me. But behind the fatigue, I saw something else in my eyes: determination. Whatever happened in that performance review, I would not let it define me. I would not let Marcus destroy the career I had worked so hard to build. With that resolve, I prepared for what would become the most important meeting of my professional life, unaware that it would unfold in ways I could never have anticipated. The morning of my performance review dawned gray and rainy, matching my mood as I carefully dressed in my navy suit. I applied extra concealer to hide the dark circles under my eyes, and practiced a confident smile in the mirror, though it felt more like a grimace. The recording device, disguised as a pen, was tucked securely in my jacket pocket, and my portfolio of accomplishments was organized in a professional leather folder. "You look ready for battle," Alexandra commented, as I grabbed a quick coffee in our kitchen. "That's exactly what this feels like," I admitted. I arrived at the office 30 minutes early, wanting time to compose myself before the 9 o'clock meeting. The office was quiet, with only a few early arrivers at their desks. I used the time to review my notes one last time, and to mentally rehearse how I would respond to criticism without becoming defensive or emotional. At precisely 9, I knocked on the door of the conference room where the review was scheduled. Marcus was already inside, seated at the head of the table, with a folder in front of him. His expression was unreadable as he gestured for me to sit. "Right on time, Shelby. Let's not waste time with pleasantries and get straight to business." I placed my notebook on the table, casually positioning the recording pen beside it, and opened my portfolio of accomplishments. I've prepared an overview of my contributions over the past year that I thought might be helpful for our discussion. Marcus barely glanced at the materials I slid toward him. "I have all the information I need for this evaluation. My assessment is based on consistent observation, not last-minute presentations." The dismissal of my preparation was the first red flag that this review would go exactly as I feared. I took a deep breath and tried again. "Of course, I just thought it might be useful to review some of the key metrics from the campaigns I've worked on. For example, the Lawrence account saw a 23% increase in engagement after we implemented my social media strategy." "The Lawrence account," Marcus interrupted, "nearly dropped us after the initial concept you developed, which completely missed their target demographic. It was only after significant revisions by Philip and myself that the campaign became viable." This was a complete distortion of what had happened. My initial concept had been well received by the client, and the revisions had been minor refinements, not major overhauls. But before I could correct this mischaracterization, Marcus moved on. "Let's discuss your overall performance trends. Your work shows a concerning lack of strategic thinking, frequent misalignment with client needs, and an inability to accept constructive feedback." For the next 20 minutes, Marcus systematically dismantled every project I had worked on, twisting facts, exaggerating minor issues, and completely ignoring positive outcomes. He referred to notes that selectively documented problems while omitting context and successes. When I attempted to provide clarification or alternative perspectives, he would cut me off. "These are not up for debate, Shelby. These are documented observations of your performance." The gaslighting was so blatant that despite my preparation, I found myself beginning to doubt my own recollection of events. Had I really mishandled that many projects? Was my perception of my own work so distorted from reality? I tried to focus on specific measurable outcomes. The client satisfaction surveys for the projects I led averaged 4.8 out of 5, which is above the department average. "That seems inconsistent with your assessment." Marcus's expression darkened. "Client surveys are just one data point, and often reflect their interactions with the entire team, not just you. The fact that you're clinging to these numbers while ignoring the substantive feedback I'm providing reinforces my concerns about your receptiveness to growth opportunities." Each time I presented evidence of my contributions, Marcus would reframe it as a problem. My thoroughness was labeled as inefficiency. My creative approaches were described as deviations from proven strategies. My collaborative efforts with colleagues were characterized as dependencies, an inability to work independently. The psychological manipulation was masterful and devastating. With each criticism, I felt my confidence eroding further, despite knowing intellectually that what was happening was unfair and inaccurate. After nearly an hour of this systematic dismantling, Marcus delivered what was clearly intended to be the final blow. Based on this comprehensive review, I am placing you on a formal performance improvement plan effective immediately. You'll have 90 days to demonstrate significant improvement in all areas we've discussed, with weekly check-ins to monitor your progress. I should be clear that failure to meet these expectations may result in termination. He slid a document across the table outlining the plan. The requirements listed were subjective, vague, and seemingly designed to be impossible to satisfy. Terms like demonstrate adequate strategic thinking and show appropriate initiative were undefined and unmeasurable, giving Marcus complete discretion to determine whether I had succeeded or failed. As I scanned the document, the reality of my situation hit me with full force. This wasn't a good faith attempt to improve my performance. This was the first step in building a case for firing me. The unfairness of it all, combined with the physical and emotional toll of the past months, finally broke through my carefully maintained composure. To my horror and shame, I felt tears welling up in my eyes. I tried to blink them away to maintain some semblance of professional dignity, but the stress had worn down my defenses completely. A tear slipped down my cheek, then another, and soon I was crying silently as I stared at the performance improvement plan that symbolized the systematic destruction of my career dreams. What happened next would change everything. Marcus noticed my tears, and his demeanor transformed entirely. His stern expression melted into one of unmistakable pleasure. His eyes lit up, and the corners of his mouth turned upward in a smile that can only be described as gleeful. Then, in a moment that still seems surreal, whenever I recall it, he actually stood up from his chair. "This is the best day ever," he exclaimed, doing a small victory dance next to the conference table. "I finally broke Miss Perfect." The display was so unprofessional, so nakedly malicious, that it momentarily shocked me out of my emotional state. Through my tears, I watched this 52-year-old department head literally dancing with joy at having made a younger female employee cry. In that moment, the reality of what was happening crystallized with perfect clarity. This had never been about my performance. It was about power control and Marcus's personal satisfaction in breaking someone he perceived as a threat. Something shifted inside me. The tears were still flowing, but behind them a new resolve was forming. I reached for a tissue from the box on the table, wiped my eyes, and looked directly at Marcus, who was still savoring his moment of triumph. "Mine too," I said quietly. His celebration faltered. "What?" I said, "This is the best day for me too." My voice was steady despite the tears. Confusion flashed across his face. This clearly wasn't the response he had expected. His victory dance slowed, and then stopped altogether as he tried to process my unexpected reaction. "The meeting is over," he said, finally, the smugness in his tone somewhat diminished. "Review the improvement plan, and come prepared to discuss implementation steps tomorrow." I gathered my materials, making sure to secure the recording pen, and left the room without another word. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or despair. The adrenaline coursing through me now was different. I headed straight for the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and played back the recording to confirm it had captured everything. The sound quality was excellent. Every word, every dismissal of my evidence, and most importantly Marcus's celebratory dance and declaration were preserved in crystal-clear audio. "This is the best day ever. I finally broke Miss Perfect." In that moment, surrounded by the sterile walls of a bathroom stall, I allowed myself a small smile through the remnants of tears. Marcus had no idea what he had just done, or what I was about to do with the evidence he had so helpfully provided. I gave myself exactly 5 minutes in that bathroom stall to collect myself, splash cold water on my face, and formulate a plan. The recording was secure on my phone, now transferred immediately to ensure it wouldn't be lost. With a deep breath and straightened shoulders, I made a direct path to Rachel's office in the HR department. Her assistant tried to tell me she was in a meeting, but something in my expression must have communicated the urgency, because Rachel appeared at her door moments later. "Shelby, what's happened?" "I need to speak with you. Now. It's important." She assessed my reddened eyes and resolute expression, then nodded. "Come in. Janet, hold my calls, please." Once the door closed behind us, I didn't waste time with preliminaries. I just had my performance review with Marcus. During the meeting, he deliberately reduced me to tears, and then celebrated by doing a victory dance and declaring it was the best day ever, because he finally broke Miss Perfect. Rachel's professional composure slipped for a moment, her eyes widening. "That's a very serious allegation." "It's not an allegation. I have it recorded." I placed my phone on her desk. Connecticut is a one-party consent state for audio recording. What he did was deliberate emotional abuse, and I have the entire meeting documented. Rachel stared at the phone for a long moment. "May I listen to it?" I nodded and played the recording from the beginning. For the next hour and 15 minutes, we sat in silence, as Marcus's systematic dismantling of my work played through the phone's speaker. Rachel took notes continuously, her expression growing more concerned as the recording progressed. When we reached the moment of Marcus's celebration, Rachel actually gasped. She rewound and played that section again, as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. "I want to file a formal complaint," I said when the recording ended. "This is just the culmination of a year of targeted harassment. I have documentation of multiple incidents, including emails, changed requirements, exclusion from meetings, and witness accounts." Rachel nodded slowly. "This is extremely concerning. I need to escalate this immediately to senior management and our legal team." She looked at me directly. "Shelby, I want to be transparent with you. This type of investigation can be difficult for everyone involved. Are you prepared for that? I've been living with this for a year. I'm more than ready for it to stop, whatever that takes." "Okay. I'll need you to email me that recording right away. Then I need you to prepare a written statement detailing today's events and any other incidents you've documented. Can you have that to me by tomorrow morning?" "I can have it to you by this afternoon," I replied. "I've been keeping detailed records." Rachel nodded approvingly. "In the meantime, I think it would be best if you worked from home for the rest of the day. I'll be calling an emergency meeting with senior leadership as soon as possible." I sent the recording to Rachel from her office, watching as she forwarded it immediately to several email addresses I didn't recognize. Before I left, she assured me that the company took such matters very seriously and that they would conduct a thorough investigation. "Thank you for bringing this forward, Shelby. It takes courage." As I packed up my things at my desk, Jasmine approached, concern evident in her expression. "What happened? You look like you've been crying, but also like you might be ready to burn the building down." "Not here," I whispered. "Call me later." Word spreads quickly in an office environment. By the next morning, though, I was working remotely. As Rachel had suggested, my phone was buzzing constantly with messages from coworkers. Some expressed concern, others curiosity, and a few shared their own uncomfortable experiences with Marcus. Most significantly, Philip reached out with a surprisingly candid message. "I've witnessed how Marcus treats you and other women on the team. I should have said something sooner. If they need corroboration for your complaint, I'm willing to speak up." His support was unexpected but welcome. As a favorite of Marcus, Philip had the most to lose by taking my side, yet he was choosing to do the right thing. By mid-afternoon, Rachel called to inform me that Marcus had been placed on administrative leave pending a full investigation. "We've scheduled interviews with all department members over the next few days. Your statement was very thorough and helpful. The recording, well, it speaks for itself." Over the next 2 weeks, I continued working remotely while the investigation proceeded. Through Jasmine and other sympathetic colleagues, I learned that nearly everyone in the department had been interviewed, and many had shared their own observations of Marcus's pattern of behavior toward female employees. The most surprising development came when Rachel contacted Emily and Kimberly, the 2 women who had previously left due to Marcus's behavior. Both agreed to provide statements about their experiences, creating a clear pattern of targeted harassment spanning years. "The floodgates have opened," Jasmine told me during one of our daily check-in calls. "It's like people were just waiting for someone to break the silence. Even some of the men are talking about how uncomfortable Marcus made them by putting them in the position of receiving preferential treatment." Despite the seemingly positive direction of the investigation, my anxiety remained high. I worried about retaliation, about being labeled a troublemaker in the industry, about the potential damage to my career. I had nightmares about walking into client meetings only to find Marcus there dancing and laughing at my distress. In a particularly vulnerable moment, I called my mother, something I rarely did with work problems. After listening to my tearful explanation, she said something that stayed with me. Shelby, sometimes standing up for yourself means standing up for everyone who couldn't. Whatever happens next, you've already won the most important battle by refusing to let someone else define your worth. 3 weeks after the performance review incident, Rachel requested an in-person meeting at the office. When I arrived, I was escorted to the executive conference room, where I found not only Rachel but also William Barnes, the CEO, and Patricia Lawson, the company's legal counsel. The formality of the setting sent my heart racing, but their expressions weren't hostile. "Thank you for coming in," Shelby William began. "We've completed a thorough investigation into your complaint against Marcus Donovan. I want to personally apologize for what you experienced under his management." Patricia stepped in with more specific details. "Our investigation substantiated your allegations and uncovered additional concerning patterns of behavior. We've interviewed 17 current and former employees who reported similar experiences or witnessed inappropriate conduct." "What happens now?" I asked, hardly daring to hope for real consequences. William's response was direct and unequivocal. "Marcus Donovan's employment with Pinnacle has been terminated effective immediately. We've also implemented several company-wide changes to prevent similar situations in the future, including mandatory leadership training, a revised harassment policy, and an anonymous reporting system." The relief that washed over me was overwhelming. After a year of doubt, gaslighting, and anxiety, I finally felt vindicated. But the vindication came with complex emotions: anger at having endured the situation for so long, sadness for the toll it had taken, and uncertainty about my future at the company. "We value your contributions to Pinnacle," William continued, "and hope you'll continue your career with us. To that end, we'd like to discuss some changes to your position that reflect your capabilities." As I left the meeting that day, I felt like I was emerging from a long, dark tunnel. Justice had been served, but the journey was far from over. The psychological wounds would take time to heal, and rebuilding my confidence would be a gradual process. But for the first time in months, I felt hope that my professional future might still hold the promise I had once seen in it. The news of Marcus's termination rippled through the company quickly. Some colleagues expressed shock, others quiet satisfaction, and a few uncomfortable realization, as they recognized their own complicity in allowing his behavior to continue unchecked for so long. The workplace culture had been irreversibly altered, and we were all navigating the aftermath together. 2 weeks after Marcus's termination, the restructuring of the marketing department began in earnest. Without Marcus at the helm, there was a palpable shift in the office atmosphere. People spoke more freely in meetings, shared ideas more readily, and the competitive tension that had characterized our team dynamic was gradually replaced by genuine collaboration. William Barnes called me into his office for a private conversation that would change the trajectory of my career at Pinnacle. The corner office, with its floor-to-ceiling windows and view of the city skyline, was intimidating, but William's approach was disarmingly direct. "Shelby, I'll be blunt. We failed you. As CEO, the company culture ultimately reflects my leadership, and I missed what was happening in the marketing department. For that, I apologize." His acknowledgement was unexpected and appreciated. "Thank you for taking action once you knew," I responded. "We're reorganizing the department, and I want to offer you a leadership position. Not Marcus's exact role, but a newly created position as Associate Creative Director, reporting directly to our Executive Creative Director. You'd lead a team of 5 with significant input on strategic direction for key accounts." The offer was both exciting and terrifying. After a year of having my abilities questioned and undermined, the prospect of stepping into a leadership role brought up all my insecurities. Yet it also represented the opportunity I had come to Pinnacle for in the first place. "I appreciate the offer," I said carefully. "Before I decide, I'd like to discuss some conditions that would be important to me." William raised an eyebrow but nodded for me to continue. "First, I'd want input on building my team. Second, I'd need assurance that the new harassment prevention measures will have real enforcement mechanisms. And third, I'd like to be involved in reshaping the department's culture and processes to ensure what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else." I had expected resistance or negotiation, but William surprised me. "Those aren't just reasonable requests, they're valuable contributions to rebuilding this department properly. I'm adding a fourth condition, a compensation package that reflects your new responsibilities and the value you bring to Pinnacle." The salary increase he proposed was substantial nearly 40% above my current compensation. It reflected not just the new role, but also, I suspected, an acknowledgement of what I had endured and the company's desire to retain me despite it. When I accepted the position, the transition happened quickly. My first week as Associate Creative Director was a whirlwind of meetings, introductions to clients in my new capacity, and beginning to reshape the team dynamics. I approached leadership with the firm intention of being the kind of manager I had always wanted to have: clear in expectations, generous with credit, and focused on developing the strengths of each team member. Not everyone was immediately comfortable with the new structure. A few of Marcus's closest allies were skeptical of my leadership, and I overheard whispered comments suggesting I had received the promotion because of the complaint rather than merit. I addressed these concerns directly in my first team meeting. "I know this transition hasn't been easy for anyone," I acknowledged. "We all came to Pinnacle because we're talented, ambitious professionals who want to create exceptional work. That's the foundation we're going to build on. Judge me by the results we achieve together, not by how we got here." One of my first initiatives was to reach out to Emily and Kimberly, the former employees who had left because of Marcus's behavior. Neither was interested in returning to Pinnacle, having established themselves elsewhere, but both agreed to meet for coffee and share insights that might help me reshape the department. "Create systems that don't rely on trust alone," Emily advised. "Clear documentation of decisions, transparent criteria for project assignments, regular check-ins with team members away from group settings where they can speak freely." Kimberly was more direct. "Watch for the subtle patterns. Who gets interrupted in meetings? Whose ideas get attributed to others? Which team members are excluded from important conversations? Those things happened long before Marcus began openly targeting me." Their perspectives were invaluable as I worked with Rachel and the executive team to implement new company-wide harassment training that went beyond generic videos and quizzes. We brought in specialized consultants who conducted interactive workshops focusing on recognizing and addressing subtle forms of workplace discrimination and harassment. Philip, who had supported my complaint, became an unexpected ally in transforming the department. His insider knowledge of how Marcus had operated provided insights that helped dismantle the problematic systems and practices that had enabled the toxic environment. He had unwritten rules, Philip explained during one of our planning sessions. Women had to prove themselves repeatedly while men got the benefit of the doubt. Criticism of women was about their fundamental abilities, while criticism of men was framed as simple mistakes anyone could make. I didn't fully see the pattern until you forced us all to look at it. The most challenging aspect of my professional rebirth was rebuilding my own confidence. Despite the external validation of the promotion and positive feedback, the psychological impact of a year under Marcus's management didn't disappear overnight. I still found myself second-guessing my decisions, anticipating criticism that no longer came, and sometimes feeling like an imposter in my new role. I decided to work with a therapist who specialized in workplace trauma, a decision that proved crucial to my recovery. Dr. Miller helped me recognize the lingering effects of the gaslighting I had experienced and develop strategies to counteract the negative thought patterns that had been reinforced over months of systematic undermining. "What you experienced was a form of psychological abuse," she explained during one session. "It doesn't vanish just because the abuser is gone. Healing takes time and intentional work." 3 months into my new role, we landed a major account that had previously been considered beyond our reach. The client specifically mentioned our fresh approach and inclusive team dynamic as factors in their decision. This concrete success did more for my confidence than any amount of reassurance could have. At the celebratory gathering following the announcement, William pulled me aside. "I won't take credit for your success, but I'm proud of the decision to promote you. This is the kind of leadership Pinnacle needs." As we approached the 6-month mark after Marcus's departure, industry recognition followed our internal improvements. A campaign developed under my leadership was shortlisted for a prestigious award, and I was invited to speak at a conference about innovative approaches in digital marketing. What struck me most during this period of professional growth was how many women in the industry reached out to share similar experiences after hearing about my story through the grapevine. The details varied, but the patterns were disturbingly consistent: gradual isolation, shifting standards, gaslighting, and eventual exit, either voluntary or forced. "You're the first person I know who fought back and won," one woman told me over coffee. "It gives me hope that maybe things can change." I began mentoring junior women in the field not just within Pinnacle, but through industry networking events and professional organizations. The experience that had nearly destroyed my career became a source of strength and wisdom that I could share with others navigating similar challenges. 1 year after the performance review incident, Pinnacle's marketing department was thriving. Our client retention rate had improved, team turnover had decreased significantly, and the quality of our work had reached new heights. The toxic competition that Marcus had fostered had been replaced by collaborative creativity that benefited everyone, including the company's bottom line. As I reflected on the journey from that tearful performance review to my current position, I recognized that justice hadn't come easily or automatically. It had required courage, evidence, allies, and leaders willing to acknowledge and address the problem once it was exposed. The system hadn't worked perfectly, but it had ultimately worked. My professional rebirth wasn't just about a new title or increased responsibility. It was about reclaiming my passion for the work, rebuilding trust in my abilities, and using my experience to create positive change beyond my own career. The victory wasn't just in Marcus's downfall, but in the transformation that followed for me and for Pinnacle as a whole. 1 year to the day after that fateful performance review, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror again. The contrast with the woman who had stared back at me 12 months earlier was striking. The dark circles had faded. I had regained the weight I had lost during the worst of the stress, and most notably, my eyes held a confidence and peace that had been absent for so long. The healing process had not been linear or simple. There were still days when an innocuous comment in a meeting would trigger memories of Marcus's criticism, days when imposter syndrome would creep in despite my proven success, days when the anxiety would return unexpectedly. But these moments had become progressively less frequent and less intense as time passed. My therapist, Dr. Miller, had been instrumental in helping me understand the lasting impact of workplace trauma. What you experienced was a form of abuse, she reminded me often. Recovery follows many of the same patterns as healing from other types of trauma. Be patient with yourself. That patience had been challenging for someone with my achievement-oriented personality, but I had gradually learned to celebrate small victories the first time. I presented an idea without anticipatory anxiety, the first client meeting where I didn't over-prepare out of fear, the first performance review with my new supervisor that didn't trigger panic attacks in the days leading up to it. Pinnacle itself had undergone a remarkable transformation. The harassment training that had once been a perfunctory annual requirement had evolved into an ongoing commitment to creating an equitable workplace. The anonymous reporting system had been used several times to address problematic behaviors before they escalated to the level I had experienced. Most significantly, the gender balance in leadership positions had improved, with 3 women now holding director-level roles. Rachel from HR, who had taken my complaint seriously when it mattered most, had become both a colleague and friend. Over lunch one day, she shared a perspective that surprised me. "Your case changed how I approach my entire role," she admitted. "I went into HR wanting to help people, but somewhere along the way I started seeing my job primarily as protecting the company. You reminded me that sometimes protecting the company means protecting its people even from others within the organization." My relationship with my former teammates had evolved in complex ways. Jasmine remained my closest ally, her early support never forgotten. Philip had become a respected colleague who continued to use his privilege constructively by amplifying women's voices in meetings and challenging subtle biases when he observed them. Some relationships had not survived the transition. 2 of Marcus's strongest supporters had eventually left the company uncomfortable with the new dynamics, and perhaps their own complicity in the previous culture. I didn't celebrate their departures, understanding that systems of workplace harassment are complex and involve many factors beyond any individual's control. The most surreal moment of my recovery journey came at an industry conference 6 months after Marcus's termination. I had just finished giving a presentation on digital marketing strategies when I spotted him across the networking area. He had found another position, apparently with a smaller agency, and was speaking with a group of attendees. My heart rate spiked momentarily, the physiological response to trauma still present, but I was surprised to discover that the emotional impact was muted. I felt neither the fear that had characterized our interactions at Pinnacle, nor the vindictive satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt a strange sense of pity mixed with indifference. His power over me was truly gone. When our eyes met briefly across the room, It was Marcus who quickly looked away and found an excuse to move to another area. The reversal of our dynamic was not lost on me, but it brought less satisfaction than I had imagined during the darkest days of his harassment. Success is the best revenge is a common saying, but I had discovered that healing is actually the best revenge. No professional achievement had done as much for my well-being as the inner work of processing the trauma, rebuilding my self-trust, and reclaiming my passion for my career. That healing extended to helping others in similar situations. I had become something of an informal resource for women experiencing workplace harassment, offering advice, perspective, and sometimes just validation when they doubted their own perceptions. 3 women had approached me confidentially after hearing about my experience through industry networks. Document everything I would tell them, echoing Jasmine's crucial advice to me. Trust your instincts, find allies, know your rights, and remember that your value isn't determined by someone else's treatment of you. I had also begun speaking occasionally at industry events about creating inclusive workplaces, sharing my story not as a victim, but as someone with insights into how toxic dynamics develop and how they can be addressed. These presentations always attracted many women, but increasingly men were attending as well, often expressing surprise at behaviors they had witnessed without recognizing their significance. Alexandra, my roommate, who had witnessed the worst of my suffering during Marcus's campaign, had moved in with her boyfriend, but we remained close. During a recent dinner, she reflected on the transformation she had observed. You know what amazes me? A year ago, you could barely talk about work without crying. Now you're not just thriving in your career, you're helping change the industry. It's like watching someone rebuild themselves into something even stronger. Her observation captured something essential about the journey. The experience had broken me down in many ways, but the rebuilding process had resulted in a version of myself with greater resilience, clearer boundaries, and a stronger sense of purpose. The scars remained, but they had become sources of wisdom rather than just painful reminders. My new role at Pinnacle continued to evolve in exciting ways. The team I led had produced award-winning work, and I had recently been approached about potentially expanding my responsibilities to include oversight of digital strategy across all departments. The career I had feared was destroyed had instead taken flight in ways I couldn't have anticipated. Perhaps the most profound change was in how I defined professional success. Before Marcus, my metrics had been primarily external recognition, advancement, praise from supervisors. Now, while those things remained pleasant affirmations, my internal measures carried more weight. Was I doing work that energized rather than depleted me? Was I contributing to a healthy environment for my team? Was I true to my values in how I approached challenges? One afternoon, as I mentored a junior team member who was struggling with confidence after a project setback, I realized how much my perspective had evolved. Failures and setbacks aren't accurate measures of your worth or abilities, I told her. They're information. Learn what you can, adjust your approach, and keep moving forward. The only true failure is letting someone else's opinion determine how you see yourself. As I spoke the words, I recognized that this was the lesson I had needed most during my darkest days at Pinnacle, and the truth I had finally embraced through the long journey of recovery. Sometimes the worst moments reveal our greatest strength, not when we never cry, but when we know exactly why our tears matter. My tears in that performance review had seemed like weakness, but they had actually been the turning point that led to reclaiming my power. Not because crying itself was powerful, but because I had refused to let those tears define me or determine my future. The woman who had wiped away tears and said mine too was simultaneously at her most vulnerable and her most powerful. She had seen through the manipulation to the truth beneath it, and had found the courage to use that truth to create change not just for herself, but for others who would come after her. That realization, more than any promotion or recognition, represented true healing. Have you ever experienced or witnessed workplace bullying? How did you handle it? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe to support more content about workplace empowerment. And remember to share this video with someone who might need to hear that they're not alone in their struggles. Thank you for listening to my journey, and I hope it gives you courage in your own challenges. We're stronger together.